Hello, and welcome back to Felony Spectator. I am your host, Heather. Today we're talking about the yoga store murders, more specifically, the Lululemon murders. Let's just get right into it. On March 11th, 2011, it was just like any other day. Jayna Murrty was working at Lululemon and had uploaded a video on her YouTube channel on how to make cherry blossoms out of tulle. I assume she thought that this would be a fun video of something she was doing while at work. Jayna had come to work early on this day because the day before, they had experienced additional foot traffic from the Apple store next to Lululemon. Apple was extremely busy because they just released the Apple iPad 2, and everybody wanted to get their hands on one. Staff remembered a 400-foot line down the street of people waiting to get their hands on this new iPad. Apple ended up selling out of the iPad, so loads of people were planning on coming back the next day to see if they had better luck. Jayna had been scheduled to work the closing shift with Britney Norwood at Lululemon. That evening when the store were closed, the store manager at Apple, I believe her name was pronounced Jayna, had to stay longer to close up this day due to the higher than normal sales. Around 10 p.m. while doing some bookkeeping, she could hear strange sounds coming from the Lululemon store next door. High-pitched screeches, yelling, low grunts, thuds, and dragging noises as if something heavy was being moved. Some of these sounds were echoing through Apple, so Jayna asked a security guard who was still at the store with her if he could check around the back room and upstairs just to make sure nobody was hiding in the store. Another manager who was still working at Apple also heard the noises and thought they sounded really odd. Security said the Apple store was all clear, so Jayna knew it was coming from next door. The sounds would continue, and they even heard someone say, "Talk to me. Don't do this. Talk to me. What's going on?" when they pressed their ears against the wall. They also thought they could hear crying. Jayna questioned if she should call 911, but in the end they didn't because the security guard dismissed it as just work drama or women drama and advised them not to get involved. Many of the sounds could have been attributed to merchandise or furniture being moved. Bad things just didn't happen in Bethesda, where they were located. It was an upscale area known to be a very safe place where lawyers and biochemists lived. Residents felt comfortable to walk outside in the evening without fear. The loud sounds lasted for about 20 minutes before fading, and by 11 p.m. when Jayna left, there was no sounds at all. Passing by Lululemon on her way out, she noticed that it was dark inside, and it appeared closed, so whoever was making those sounds, presumably staff, had left for the night, so there was no more need to worry. The following day, March 12, 2011, was going to be another busy day for Apple. People were lining up early again, including those who had missed out the previous day when iPad 2s were sold out. Among those people was Ryan. He arrived around 7:45 a.m., securing one of the very first spots in line 2 hours before the store even opened, determined not to miss out this time because he missed out yesterday. Then around 8 a.m., Rachel Evans, an employee at Lululemon, approached Ryan for help, and he noticed that she seemed shaken up and nervous. She informed him that she worked at Lululemon next door, but the store looked as though it had been ransacked. She had noticed blood drops on the main floor, and she thought she heard strange moaning sounds coming from the back of the store. She asked Ryan if he had seen anyone else go into the store before her. And Ryan hadn't, but he offered to go inside and check the store for her since she was too scared to venture further. As Rachel waited out front, Ryan slowly walked towards the back, calling out to see if anyone was there. As he approached the back area, he noticed the blood stains became more concentrated the further he went. Then, near the back, he saw a large pool of blood seeping from underneath a purple door. Ryan attempted to open the door, but a body was blocking its opening. This body was face down, surrounded by blood, seemingly dead. Disturbed by what he saw, he turned to exit the store and spotted another pair of legs by an open door of a bathroom. He cautiously approached the second body, and he thought he heard faint moaning. To his horror, he discovered a female with her arms arms bound above her head with zip ties, and the crotch of her pants had been cut open. She too had blood all over her face. Urgently, Ryan called out to Rachel, letting her know that he had found 2 people inside. One appeared to be dead and the other who was barely breathing. Rachel immediately dialed 911 for help. Rachel suspected that it was Britney Norwood and Jayna Murrty, as they were the last 2 people who worked at Lululemon the night of the 11th. Britney Norwood had grown up in Washington State with 8 siblings. Her family was close and all seemed to be hardworking, kind people. One of her sisters grew up to be a doctor, and 3 of her brothers were engineers. Britney was a bubbly and caring person who was said to love life. Britney lived with her sister Marissa in the same home. Marissa owned the home, but Britney rented the basement apartment with a roommate. Britney had aspirations of opening her own gym one day and was very into sports and fitness. She was very active and once even a star player on her college soccer team. Her family thought Britney enjoyed working at Lululemon. It gave her customer service skills she could use later when she opened her gym. Now, even though she wanted to open her own gym, she had never worked in a gym before, so she recently applied at Equinox, a high-end health club, as a personal trainer. She had successfully gone through 1 interview, and a second interview was lined up for the following Monday. Jayna Murrty was a part-time manager working at Lululemon while also completing her master's degree at Johns Hopkins University. She was very well-liked and made friends anywhere she went. Rachel was devastated when she figured out that it was Britney and Jayna. When detectives arrived, they rushed Britney immediately to the hospital. She had been bound with plastic zip ties, she was covered in blood, and her yoga pants torn at the crotch. She also had a pretty large cut on her forehead, presumably made by a fairly large white-colored rock the size of a baseball, which was also covered in blood and found nearby her body. The hallway where Jayna laid was just horrible to see. The wall and metal bookshelf was heavily splattered with blood. The back of Jayna's head was split wide open, and she had marks all over her body from being beaten. There was a rope around her neck and a red toolbox that laid on her shoulders with the contents spilling out. The back of her pants were also cut open, just like Britney's. Britney spoke to the officers while at the hospital, and what she initially remembered was that 2 masked men slipped into the store and attacked them after the store was closed. An investigation would begin immediately. Inside Lululemon, they didn't have surveillance cameras, so it was crucial that detectives took as much evidence as possible. The store itself was separated by 4 main sections. The front section was where people came in and also had the cashier area. It was also the main sales area where tables and racks displayed items. Another section was the large fitting room area, then a rear stock room, and lastly, a hallway that led to an emergency exit. The front section wasn't too trashed. A couple mannequins had been pushed over, and there was only a couple bloody shoe prints and a few drops of blood, but it really wasn't that bad at all. Behind the register, the safe was opened and receipts had been thrown all over the floor. And then just beyond the cash area, this is where things took a turn. A flat screen TV had been toppled over along with athletic bags, water bottles, and lip gloss. This area looked more like signs of a struggle than a robbery. In the fitting room, it got worse. There was a partial bloody handprint in the corner, bloody droplets all over the floor, and large red bloody shoe prints crisscrossing all over each other, going from the stockroom to the bathroom. In the bathroom where Britney was found, the survivor, there was rocks and blood all over the ground. In the sink was more blood, and blood was smeared across the mirror. Severed zip ties were on the floor as well, presumably from when the medics came and untied Britney. A wooden coat hanger was also on the ground. Going towards the stockroom, there was a bottle of window cleaner on the ground, the garbage can of used paper towels was toppled over, and a Buddha statue had been knocked down as well. The stockroom floor was smeared with bloody shoe prints, but nothing was knocked down and it seemed mostly untouched. Near a wall in the stockroom beside a pair of chairs was Britney's wallet. To the right was a little kitchenette with a small sink, a small fridge, and microwave. On the ground here was another bottle of window cleaner, a bottle of all-purpose cleaner, and a scrub brush. Above the sink was a foot-long serrated knife sitting on 2 hooks, which looked clean. 10 feet away, near the entrance of the stockroom, was an athletic bag belonging to Jayna. Inside was computer cords, a camera, a tangerine, a bottle of wine, a book, and another wallet belonging to Jayna Murrty. Missing from the wallet was any cash, and her car keys were missing as well. The purple door was the door that led to a hallway that the emergency exit was down. And again, this is where Jayna was found. Bloody footprints would appear as though they were going down the hallway, but they suddenly disappeared, which made officers question if the robbers took their shoes off. A uniformed officer followed the ambulance to the hospital and stood near Britney to protect her, thinking she still might be in danger. He would also collect her clothes after the doctors removed them for evidence. They looked as though they were slashed and bloody. Britney also had cuts all over, but not nearly as bad as Jayna. Jayna had lacerations on her chest, stomach, back, legs, and defensive wounds on her hands. Now, Britney and Jayna were the only 2 people working the closing shift. They also both left together at 9:45 p.m. It said that Britney walked towards the subway and Jayna in the opposite direction to her car. Not long after they left, Britney called Jayna to say that she left her wallet in the store. She then begged Jayna to let her back in. Britney informed her that she couldn't get on the subway without it because her Metro card was in her wallet. Jayna agreed to go back because she had also forgot her laptop, so she made an exception and agreed to go in, which normally they wouldn't do. According to Britney, they met at the front door, deactivated the alarm, and they both ran towards the back to find their stuff, leaving the front door unlocked because they were going to be fast. Britney claimed she still couldn't find her wallet, so Jayna had given her some bus passes. Now, while they were in the back room talking about the bus passes, 2 masked men came in wearing black clothes and hoodies over their heads and balaclavas. Britney claims she couldn't even make out what race they were due to how concealing their clothes were. One of the men, who was approximately 6 feet tall, grabbed Jayna by the hair. The other, much shorter, about 5'3", threw Britney to the ground, demanding money. Britney opened 3 small safes to give them what little money was left after closing the store. He then allegedly dragged Britney to the back of the store and violated her, which included using a wooden coat hanger. He then struck her so hard in the head that she doesn't really remember a lot after this point. ADT security confirmed that the alarm was set at 9:45 and then disarmed at 10:05, which basically matched Britney's statement. Strangely, Jayna's car, a silver Pontiac, was later found parked 3 blocks away from the store. Now, Britney had implied that Jayna had driven back to the store and met her at the front door. Perhaps she was mistaken, but it did seem odd that Jayna wouldn't have driven back to the store to meet Britney and walked instead. While the detectives were collecting evidence, a security patrolman went to the Lululemon store and asked to see an officer. The patrolman admitted that he had seen a silver Pontiac at 12:30 a.m. with someone sitting behind the wheel in the strip mall parking lot. The patrolman had been working the night shift, and just after midnight, he drove his car through the parking lot. He took note of the silver Pontiac because it had its lights on. He didn't bother speaking to the driver, so he wasn't sure if it was a man or a woman. 2 hours later, he saw the car was still in the parking lot, again with the lights on. But then an hour later, it was still there with the lights off. And this was very odd. Who was driving this car around while the girls were being attacked inside Lululemon? Another strange thing was that the detectives would find 2 pairs of running shoes under a table in the change room. A woman's pair and a men's pair of shoes, both having red stains resembling blood, mostly on their treads. The men's shoes were huge. They were a size 14 runner, which also isn't common. The police easily matched the treads on these runners to the bloody shoe prints that were left behind in the store. But why would the robbers leave their bloody shoe prints inside the store? And Britney said it was 2 men. So was the shorter man wearing women's shoes? Detectives would speak to other staff members of Lululemon to see if they had noticed any unusual behavior by customers, or people hanging outside. Rachel, the store manager, informed the police that everything seemed fine, except for Britney. The night before the murder, Jayna had called Rachel between 9:45 and 10 p.m. Jayna was walking to her car after work and wanted to inform Rachel that Britney had a pair of Lululemon pants in her bag, and she believed that they were stolen. The girls discussed that it was time to terminate Britney's employment. Britney had also been suspected of other theft recently as well, but the call was cut short because Britney was calling Jayna on the other line. And we'll get into more detail in just a little bit. First, remember Britney had said that 2 men dressed in black entered the store? Surveillance video of the area, not right in front of Lululemon, but nearby, was handed in to the police. It would show that just after 11 p.m., 2 men appear, both wearing black. One was about 6 feet tall and the other much shorter. One was talking on the phone. The detectives thought that maybe these were them, the murderers. Britney had described them perfectly, and the police had started to doubt Britney before seeing this video because it was hard to believe her story. Her injuries weren't consistent with the robbery and so much less brutal than what Jayna experienced. Yes, she was cut all over, her back, her arms, her legs, but they were mostly superficial. And why was Britney's life spared? Jayna was so brutally murdered, but Britney was alive and had no life-threatening injuries. Jayna's autopsy would show that she had over 200 injuries to her face, head, and neck, and about 100 to her hands, arms, and shoulders. The final count was just about 331 injuries. The ones on her arms and hands were largely defensive wounds, which show that she fought hard with her attacker. There was also 5 different wound patterns, meaning that her attackers used 5 different things to beat her with, and others were from a large, sharp object. She had 2 rope burns, one on her chin and one on her throat. The worst part was most of her injuries had blood in the wound paths, meaning she was alive through most of her beating. Hopefully she was unconscious so she wasn't suffering, but her heart was beating. The worst wound was a deep stab wound at the base of her skull, which chipped off a piece of vertebrae and cut the base of her brain. That would be the fatal wound. Detectives wondered if Britney knew the robbers. Detectives really needed to make sure there wasn't 2 crazed individuals running loose in Bethesda. Police did speak out to media in hopes that someone would remember something. 2 men in masks wearing dark colors would definitely stand out in this neighborhood. Maybe someone could even remember someone moving a silver Pontiac. And the attack wasn't late either, based on the video of the 2 men. So sometime between 10 and 11 p.m., which means lots of people were probably still awake, driving around or walking. So hopefully someone saw something. A woman would come forward saying that she was walking her dog around 11:15 past the store. She thought she heard a woman shouting, but nothing stood out to her as odd at the time, and she didn't see the 2 men. Police really needed to identify these 2 men. Other tips came in, mostly leading to dead ends, but one name kept popping up, and his name was Keith Lockett. Keith was a tall African-American homeless man that hung out in Bethesda. He was often seen half a mile from Lululemon at Bethesda Cares, which was a nonprofit where people could go for counseling, send or receive emails, have a shower, shave, get a meal, and find shelter. They also had clothes for people to change into, and Keith often visited, cleaned himself up, and would try and fit into the community. Unfortunately, he was also an alcoholic, and his behavior when he drank really upset people, which made him stand out. Around the corner of Lululemon, a witness said that they saw Keith walking with 2 white men on the morning of the murder. When police spoke with Keith, he insisted he wasn't near Lululemon and would never harm a woman. He even offered up his DNA as proof. Lululemon founder Chip Wilson offered $125,000 in reward money to help find the person responsible for the murder and abuse of their staff. As time went on, Britney's character would be questioned. A lot of people came out to say that Britney was very likable and often really generous with her friends. With that said, most people said otherwise. Weird things often happened when she was around. For example, a friend remembered that sometimes her wallet would disappear. At first, she thought she was just forgetful and kept losing it. but people thought that it was probably Britney who stole it. She then realized that Britney was always around when her wallet vanished. And most people who knew Britney knew that things would disappear when she was around. And everyone would admit that Britney was fun to hang out with, but if she was around, you needed to keep an eye on your belongings. Even things locked up weren't safe. It said that Britney had been caught going through lockers at school and would steal textbooks to resell them. Another friend randomly was missing $60 after she hung out with Britney. Now, remember, Britney was a star soccer player in college. Well, her teammates also experienced theft while she was on the team. A soccer teammate had lost a Versace shirt and confronted Britney, who eventually broke down and admitted to taking it. And things like this happened a lot to her teammates, so they finally spoke to the coach. After the coach was informed, Britney strangely voluntarily left the team. Due to privacy, her teammates never really knew if she was kicked off the team or what really happened. But the theft stopped when she was gone. And this is a little sad because she'd always dreamed of playing for the US national soccer team and had scholarships that paid for her schooling. She was also only 11 credits short of graduating when Britney left the school. After leaving school, she then moved to Washington, D.C., where her two sisters lived. And she told everyone that she did actually graduate from Stony Brook, which was a lie. Her reason for not attending graduation was her student loans. She owed too much money and was behind in payments, so she wasn't allowed to go. Now, she not only lied to her friends and family, she also lied to a new boyfriend. And this lie about her fake degree resulted in a pretty ugly breakup. Britney had met her boyfriend while working at his dentist office. And when he suspected her of lying, he confronted her and their relationship ended. Her ex began dating someone new, but Britney wouldn't leave him alone. She called him weekly and would show up at his home uninvited. He tried his best to be patient until she broke into his house while he and his girlfriend weren't home. Allegedly, she stole diamond earrings, perfume, clothing, checks from a checkbook, house keys, and car keys. They would file a restraining order and demand their belongings back. During the hearing for the restraining order, her ex also reported that Britney had anger issues. She would push and punch things, sometimes even throw things at him when they argued. The restraining order was granted, but she would be summoned back to court for violating the restraining order. Britney decided not to show up to court, and a bench warrant would be issued. Now, apparently in DC, police don't have time to serve bench warrants, so after a year, they just expire. Britney simply stayed out of trouble and her warrant disappeared. Now, Britney obviously didn't work at the dentist's office anymore. Instead, she gained employment at Willard Hotel. She also moved in with one of her sisters when she was evicted from her own new apartment in DC for being 2 months late on rent. It would seem that Britney preferred to spend her money on things like expensive hairstyles, expensive wine, fancy restaurants, and designer clothing. She gave this illusion that she made lots of money, even though she was in quite a bit of debt. Britney left Willard Hotel and got a job at the Georgetown Lululemon. She claimed that she wanted a career change and maybe one day open her own gym. Working at Lululemon suited her for the time being. It was a high-end athletic store, and she was a sporty person, so it seemed to fit. Unfortunately, while working at the Georgetown Lululemon, staff reported that money would go missing from their wallets. The cash registers would come up short at the end of the night as well, and management started to notice that this only happened on shifts that Britney was working. She was eventually fired for taking advantage of her employee discount during an employment staff shopping night. Now, I don't know the details, but I believe it was because staff were only allowed to spend a certain dollar amount. And she exceeded this amount by quite a bit, taking advantage of her discount. When she was fired, Britney was furious and told management that she would be taking legal action. Head office launched an internal investigation, but the decision to let her go was overturned. I'm not entirely sure why, but the regional manager then gave her a choice of which location Britney wanted to work for, as it would be uncomfortable if she returned to the Georgetown location. Britney chose Bethesda. Now, Jayna was a huge huge part of the Bethesda Lululemon. Lululemon was even looking at her for a corporate job at their Vancouver, Canada headquarters because they valued her so much. She was very outgoing, she was athletic, she loved the adrenaline of bungee jumping and scuba diving. She also loved to salsa dance and wasn't afraid to try anything. Jayna also had an undergraduate degree in business and marketing, and people loved her. She made friends anywhere she went. It was a friend that actually introduced her to Lululemon, and Jayna loved the company and what it stood for, so she decided to work there while finishing her master's in business. Now, Jayna and Britney only worked together for a few short months. And at first, Britney got along with everyone, including Jayna. Britney seemed very ambitious, and people were excited for her to one day open her own gym. At home, things weren't great. She had a roommate for a while, and her roommate was a lovely, educated, religious woman who would later speak out. Now, Britney wasn't considerate of her at all, and often woke her in the middle of the night when she brought friends home from the bar. Britney also didn't put her roommates' names on the bills, but she continuously asked for more and more money, claiming the bills were increasing. Now, even though Britney was asking for more money from her roommate, she was getting hounded by debt collectors for not paying said bills. Her student loans weren't getting paid, and her bank accounts were heavily overdrawn. I also read that as of February 2011, Britney was looking at Craigslist ads for sugar daddies. February 24th, she even answered one. Britney and the man texted back and forth until he revealed that he was looking for a weekend relationship. Britney asked what the weekly allowance would be, but they could discuss that later when they met. I believe she also responded to a few others as well and hadn't sealed the deal on a sugar daddy. Now, back at work, it didn't take long before Britney would start stealing again. One coworker had let her use her perfume because Britney thought it smelled so amazing. But that perfume was suddenly missing from her bag at the end of her shift. Another worker reported missing money from her wallet, and when she reported it, the manager said that it was the third recent report from staff who had money gone missing. Coincidentally, Britney had worked all those same shifts when money disappeared. Not to single Britney out, the store would have a staff meeting to discuss code of conduct. It was discussed that things were going missing, and a bottle of Vera Wang perfume had disappeared as well. After the meeting, one of the supervisors pulled a manager aside saying that they believed they saw the perfume in Britney's bag during bag checks. A bag check is exactly what it sounds like. When an employee leaves the store, whether it's a break or the end of their shift, a manager is allowed to look in their bags, purse, or backpack to make sure that nothing has been stolen. Staff do this for management as well. Everybody gets their bags checked when they leave. It's a loss prevention policy, and it's not new, nor does it violate any rights. I remember doing this as a kid when I worked in retail. Anyway, Rachel, the store manager, knew that Britney was fired and brought back from the Georgetown store and heard the rumors of theft. Rachel discussed with the other managers that she suspected that Britney was now doing it to them. Unfortunately, they didn't really have any proof yet, so police weren't called and it wasn't brought up to the higher management either. Now, as far as they knew, Britney wasn't aware that everyone was suspicious. Or maybe she didn't care because she was planning on leaving Lululemon and had an interview with a high-end health club called Equinox. Her first interview went well, and she was scheduled for a second interview the Monday after the murders. With that said, Britney probably didn't count on being caught stealing leggings before getting hired at Equinox. The day of the murders, Jayna had gone to the store early to help out, knowing it was going to be busy, especially since Apple had a lineup the day before. Jayna and another manager had talked about Britney, and Jayna joked about whether or not she'd catch Britney stealing that night. Work was normal, everyone was pleasant, polite, and worked well together. Customers would later report that everyone was happy, helpful, and there didn't seem to be any tension. The doors were closed at 8:57 p.m., the girls did their closing duties, and at 9:30, they did their routine bag checks. Now, this is when Jayna saw the workout pants with the tag still on them in Britney's bag. She asked Britney if she had the receipt, but Britney said no. She had thrown the receipt away because employee purchases were final sale, so she didn't think she needed to keep it. Britney informed Jayna that another manager had rang her up earlier in the day. Now, Jayna didn't remember this, so she was going to go look up the transaction, but the computers were already off. She told Britney that she'd follow up with her the next day. They set the alarm at 9:45, walked out, going in the opposite directions. Jayna then called Chioma, the manager Britney claimed to have rung up her pants, and asked if it was true. Chioma was sure she did not do an employee transaction for Britney. Jayna then called the store manager Rachel to report the suspicious theft. When Rachel and Jayna spoke, they were kind of relieved that they finally caught her red-handed, and Rachel was going to fire her the following day. And this is where things go sideways. Britney then calls Jayna 2 times, as the first call went unanswered, to ask if she could be let back in the store, as she forgot her wallet. When Britney first spoke to detectives, she claims that they met at the front door and that Jayna drove her car. Suspicious of Britney, detectives would speak to her again for more information. They also asked her if Lululemon sold shoes, in which Britney said no, but indicated that there was 2 pairs of shoes in the fitting rooms that they used for alterations. A pair for women and a pair for men, which was a size 14. Detectives had already realized that the shoe prints matched the bloody prints in the store. But why would these men put on the shoes from the change room, and then why would they put them back when they were done? This was not normal behavior for a criminal. They're going to want to destroy any evidence. This was something else that was pointing back to Britney. Now let's remember, Britney was also allegedly a victim of SA and informed nurses and detectives that a coat hanger had been used during the assault. Police reviewed the examination report and it revealed that there was no tears or tenderness reported, which is basically impossible if a coat hanger's being used. Criminals probably aren't going to be gentle. The blood on her face was also interesting in that it was dripping downwards as if she was standing. But she said she got hit with something and blacked out, and she was found lying on the bathroom floor. But none of the blood had shifted to a different direction. It had dried, caked on her face, going downward. The biggest problem was that the police had this video surveillance that matched the attackers. So who were they? Detectives also needed to make sure that they were right about Britney, because if they were wrong, it was more than likely going to turn into a racial issue. Britney was Black. And there has been so many times where a Black person has been arrested of something based on their skin color and even convicted. And this is the last thing that detectives wanted to happen. Detectives needed to get Britney back to the station. So they asked her if she would provide fingerprints and DNA so they could rule her out. Britney would agree and come on March 16th with her dad and a few siblings for support. It was said that she was still very shaken up and not mentally well. Police would lead Britney into a room that had surveillance. She was also informed that she was free to leave at any time. They would take the hair samples first, and when they were getting the ink ready for prints, Britney asked if they had any good news. They engaged in some chit-chat, but began to ask more questions. And her story was mostly the same, except this time she added that she once broke free of her attacker and tried to help Jayna before being dragged back in. Also added that she thought that she dripped her blood on top of Jayna. When asked why she thought that they spared her life, she said something along the lines of them wanting to play with her because she was pretty. Detectives finally asked if Jayna had ever given Britney a ride home. She said no, but started to look uncomfortable. She then asked if she could just get her fingerprints over and done with because she wanted to go, which was fine because she was free to leave. The following day, Britney's brother then called the main detective and said that Britney had forgotten to give detectives some pretty important information. Britney had been so stressed about the attack that she forgot. What she had remembered and told her brother was that the attackers had made her move Jayna's car. He suggested that he should bring Britney back in for further discussion, and everybody agreed. Now, Britney was not read her rights again because the detectives wanted her to feel comfortable and were hoping that she'd let something slip by accident. Now, Britney admitted she was still really stressed out, she was not sleeping well, and it just must have slipped her mind. She also said she was scared to leave the house and felt really unsafe. The detectives did try their best to be kind and compassionate. So her story in a nutshell this time was, again, two men came into the store and Jayna is dragged to the back of the store where she's brutally beat to death. Britney gets punched and also brought to the back of the store where she's thrown on top of Jayna's body when Jayna is alive and still moaning. Britney is then told to go move Jayna's car from the parking lot to the road 3 blocks away. If she didn't do this, they would kill her. So Britney puts on a hat, walks out of the store, and drives the car 3 blocks away, and even admits to seeing a cop, but does nothing because she's too scared. She then walks the 3 blocks back to the store, still covered in blood, and re-enters, accidentally leaving the hat in Jayna's car. Now, this is a Friday night. The streets are still somewhat busy, but somehow nobody sees her or notices a young female covered in blood. Now, remember, they had security who saw the car at midnight and again later still in the parking lot. So when did she actually move the car? And this version is even more strange. Why didn't she drive away? Why didn't she ask someone for help? She was out of the store, safe and able to get help, but instead she returns to the store, a place where her coworker's being beat to death, all because they told her to. Chris, her brother, would be asked to go talk to Britney because her story was just not making sense. And he even admitted to detectives that something wasn't right. So he flat out asks her if she was responsible, and she started to crack a little bit and told him that she ruined the family and she didn't want to be a disappointment. Now, she didn't admit to killing Jayna, but she claimed she didn't know what happened. Chris would advise her to get a lawyer, and they started to scheme on how to get her cleared of this. They discussed an insanity plea, or maybe they could concoct a plan that Jayna attacked her first. Chris also says that he thinks if the room was bugged, that couldn't be used in court. He then instructed her on how to act when she spoke to detectives. Don't look to the left or down because that means you're lying. He told her to focus on an object to the right and not to look at anything else. After this, Britney wouldn't talk to detectives. They tried for hours upon hours. They got her pizza, held her hand, had a female try and console her. They told her without her side of the story, she was going to seem like a cold-blooded killer. And they needed something. But she just wouldn't crack. She just kept on crying and saying no. They arrested her anyways, and this was due to the DNA evidence in Jayna's car and the fact that she was the last person to see Jayna alive. And this was a strange time for the community. It was a relief to know that there was not 2 crazed men running around town, but also knowing it was a female coworker who worked at Lululemon with Jayna was so confusing, especially the brutality of it. Britney came from a well-respected family, and she didn't have a criminal record. So what made her kill someone so violently? And this attack is presumably over shoplifting. Jayna had caught her red-handed and told her she was going to talk to management the following day. But was it really over a stolen pair of pants? Britney's parents hired Doug Wood as Britney's attorney. He was known to be aggressive and use any and every loophole he could find to win his cases. He, of course, hoped that the police gathered evidence incorrectly or what they had couldn't fully point Britney 100%, but it wasn't looking good. Now, even though she thought she spent hours covering up what she did, she left all the evidence behind in hopes to frame someone else. She then lied to police and didn't really have a good reason. Doug Wood, her attorney, then thought maybe she had a brain injury from playing soccer. She had had 2 concussions while playing soccer in college, so this must have been why she lost her temper. Dr. David Williamson, who worked at Johns Hopkins and dedicated his work to understanding dynamic brain injuries, would be hired to evaluate Britney. The police, on the other hand, were still continuing to gather DNA evidence against Britney. They used blood splatter and the footprints to create a timeline and a story about what happened in the store that night. It was pretty evident that the girls had a struggle in the store. Jayna then tried to run out the back emergency exit and Britney pulled her back in. She brutally and continuously began stabbing and beating Jayna. she used multiple objects to beat Jayna with while wearing the store's shoes to help create this fake story. After moving Jayna's car, she came back into the store, used her shirt to get some of Jayna's blood to smear around the bathroom floor. Then she laid down in it to make it look like she was attacked as well. What she did would have taken hours. She put a lot of thought into covering her tracks. So was this because of a brain injury, or was this premeditation? Prosecution pointed out that there was no way that she could have stabbed someone 331 times in a row. They had proof that she switched weapons. She used a hammer, a wrench, the Buddha statue, a screwdriver, a merchandise peg, and box cutters. So this just further proves that she thought about her actions and continued to brutalize Jayna. She had plenty of opportunity to stop, but instead she just kept going. Britney's attorney tried to get the first 5 interviews removed from the court proceedings, stating that she was in distress and didn't know she was allowed to leave the police station. The judge ruled against that and allowed all 5 interviews almost in their entirety to be shown to the jurors. Some of the 5th interview, when the questions got more intense, were excluded because she asked to go home. But the judge thought Britney seemed pretty in control in the other 4 videos. She answered the questions clearly and confidently, so he allowed them in court. Mr. Woods, Britney's attorney, would finally ask if they could come up with a plea deal. His deal was if Britney pled guilty, could they cap her sentence so she could apply for parole after 15 years? Jayna's family refused and wanted to go to trial for first-degree murder. During the trial, Britney's lawyer decided to drop the concussion excuse. He then claimed that Britney and Jayna mutually had an argument. They both fought equally. This wasn't premeditated, it wasn't deliberate, it was just a fight between the 2 girls. Britney lost control and Jayna lost her life. He went on to say that Britney was in a nightmare and made the mistake of taking steps to cover up what happened because she was lost. He wanted the jury to see that she wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but someone who was confused. He really was hoping for a lesser sentence. Prosecution made sure that the jury heard all the details, as well as the medical examiner who discussed 9 of the main major wounds. Now, the judge only allowed 9 as to not overwhelm the jury. It was also pointed out that Britney didn't have any serious injuries, so for them to imply that they fought was wrong. They mentioned that a witness at Apple next door had heard female voices insisting that they talk. She was saying, "Tell me what's going on." Jayna wasn't fighting, but she was trying to solve the problem rationally. When it was time for jurors to deliberate, the "why did Britney do it" would make it really hard for them. They didn't know about the stolen pants found in Britney's bag, as that wasn't allowed in court. They did wonder, though, if it had to do with shoplifting, or they wondered if they were fighting over a boy. The why seemed really important because they were about to lock someone up for a very long time. The motive could mean the difference between life or being eligible for parole. In the end, Britney would be found guilty of first-degree murder. She would speak at her sentencing hearing directly to Jayna's family. She did not admit guilt, but only apologized for the pain that they were experiencing, not that she caused the pain. She mentioned that she hoped one day that they'd find peace in their heart. She also spoke to her own family and insisted that being convicted wasn't anything they did or did not do. They were the best, most loving, and supportive family. She also asked the judge for a sentence with hope and not to give her life without parole, although acknowledged that she would be getting a severe punishment. She was very, very careful with her words, though. In the end, she would be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Lululemon eventually reopened the store after making a public announcement that it would undergo a renovation, and the new theme of the store would be love in honor of Jayna Murrty. A large stained glass window that spelled out love was installed above the storefront, but strangely, the bathroom where Britney staged her fake attack remained mostly the same. The layout of the change rooms were also mostly unchanged, as was the small hall and closet area where Jayna was beat and stabbed. A lot of employees couldn't go back to work as the trauma was just too great. Britney Norwood, to this day, has not revealed why she took Jayna's life that day. She did try to appeal, requesting a new trial due to being improperly questioned, but that was denied. My thoughts? This is one of the more senseless and heartless cases I've read about. We have spoken of senseless murders, and to be honest, most are senseless. But this one seems so harsh. They were so young, and nothing really happened to justify Jayna's death. There is not a single reason I can think of why Britney needed to do what she did. It's also confusing because Britney didn't really have a bad childhood. She wasn't abused, she wasn't poor, she was a talented athlete. So what happened to make her so mad? I've also worked in retail. I have been a manager and have worked with people who were fired for shoplifting, and they didn't come back and murder anyone. I would never in a million years think that something like this would happen, especially at a place like Lululemon, which is about positivity and motivation. I wonder if one day Britney will come out with something to explain her actions. But I have a feeling that if that does happen, we need to take it with a grain of salt. She is a known liar and has lied many times in the past to avoid trouble or judgment. It's so hard to imagine why she would need to inflict 331 wounds on Jayna. Why was it so brutal? It's just so sad. What do you think? Is she a nice girl that just has made a lot of bad choices and she lost her temper? Or was there something more? Thanks again for joining me here at Felony Spectator. We will see you again soon.